Hello everyone. So in this video I'm going to go over part 2 of the practice test questions, which is about writing code. So on the real test I'm going to provide you with a lined area that will have horizontal lines for writing lines of code, and then it'll also have vertical lines to help you align your indentations. Now keep in mind this will be a paper and pencil test, so you'll not be able to run your code, so make sure that you practice writing it without running it, and make sure you're checking over it and making sure it's as correct as can be before you run it. So number 1, write a program that asks the user to input a whole number of days and then prints a message telling the user how many weeks and days that is in whole numbers. So make sure the printed message uses plural and singular forms correctly. For example, if the user enters 8, the program should tell the user that's 1 week and 1 day. If the user enters 9, the program should tell the user that's 1 week and 2 days. So make sure basically you're putting the S on when it's plural and not when it's not plural. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by asking the user how many days. All right, so for this we're going to need, I don't know what we should call it, maybe like answer or something. So you start off with a variable name. I'm going to put comments in while I'm doing this just for people who want to read the solutions and not like actually watch the video, because I'll link to this solution page here too. So ask the user how many days. All right, and so in order to do that, we're going to need the input command. It does say to ask the user for their input, so that is the name of the command. And then the question we want to ask the user is, I don't know, maybe enter a whole number of days or something like that. And we are then going to convert that to, it looks like we're supposed to use integers in this question, so let's convert that to an int. So we're going to wrap the int command around the input like that, just like putting a foot in a sock. The foot is the input, the sock is the int. We're plugging that input into the int command. Okay, so now we need to somehow figure out how to tell them how many weeks and days that is. So basically we need to like calculate how many weeks is that, how many days is that. So we got to figure out some formulas for doing that. So hopefully you remember from when we did this question earlier in the class, what we need to do is basically check how many times does 7 go into their answer. So you can do that with the double slash operation like this, answer /7. So however many times 7 goes into their answer, that'll be the number of weeks. And then to get the days, we do the remainder after division by 7. So whatever will be left over after that, dividing by 7, like this. Okay, so that part's not too bad, but we have to figure out how to make it print out in a way where we have singular and plural weeks or days. So there's a few ways you could do this. You could have like some kind of conditional thing like this, like if weeks. So let's see, if it was 0 weeks, 0 goes with a plural, right? So I actually think 1 is the only time you would do it singularly. So you could do like if weeks equals 1, but then you also have to check if the days equals 1. So I guess one way you could do this would be like if weeks equal 1 and days equal 1, then they're both singular, right? So then you'd say print that's weeks. Well, I guess you could just put 1 because at this point you know it's 1, but anyway, week singular and days day singular, right? And then you could do like an elif where you check right, so if they're not both 1, then you can check like if just weeks is 1, and then you could check if just days is 1. So like put some code here and then do another elif down here, like elif days equal 1, and then otherwise they'd both have to be plural, right? This is probably the easiest way to do it. Okay, so right, so if they're not both 1, then we can check if weeks is 1, but that would then automatically mean that days is not 1, since we already know they're not both 1 if we get down to here. Okay, so if just weeks is 1, then we would print that's weeks. So the word week would be singular, but the word days, and remember the name of the variable days and weeks here is, but it doesn't matter whether that's plural, we're just using the same variable names that we picked over here on line 3 and 4, okay? So make sure you can distinguish between your variables and what the the letters are that are being printed. So days would be plural there. Okay. Elif days equal 1. We do basically the same thing, but with day being singular and weeks being plural. So that's the variable name, and then weeks plural, and okay, that's the variable name, and then day singular. All right, and then otherwise, if none of these 3 conditions were true, then both weeks and days were plural. So then we would put S's on both of them. That's weeks, and days. So some things you would want to check when you're doing this on paper is like make sure you put colons everywhere, colon on all of your if, your elifs and your else, or any for loops or function definitions. Make sure that all your variable names match. Like don't call it weeks up here and then call it week down here, or days up here and day down here, because those are variable names. They have to match. Maybe we should have just called them like W and D or something. That might have, oops, why did it change to that? I don't know. Would that have made it easier? I don't know. Maybe I like that better, but anyway, I should stick with what I picked first, I guess. Right, so you will not be able to test it. Make sure that you put your int on the outside of your input, or put your float on the outside of your input if you wanted to convert something to a number. And I'm just gonna like run this a couple times and test it, and I'm gonna put in some more comments, but I'll pause the video. Okay, but let's try the test cases here. So if they enter 8, it should be 1 week, 1 day. Yep. If I put 9, that should be 1 week, 2 days, plural. Yep. If I put 15, it should be 2 weeks, plural, and 1 day, singular. Yep. And if I do 16, 2 weeks, 2 days. But of course you won't be able to check on the test. Okay. Okay, so I just put in some comments for people to look at this, for people who don't want to watch the videos. All right, so number 2. Write a function called count vowels that takes 1 parameter, a string s, and returns the number of vowels, a, e, I, o, u lowercase or a, e, I, o, u uppercase that are in the string. And then you will need the accumulator pattern. Okay, so we're going to define the function def count vowels. Be careful with your capitalization. It needs to match whatever I told you. And then 1 parameter called s, which is a string. Okay, so we are going to need the accumulator pattern. So we're going to start our accumulator variable at 0. So the variable is going to count how many vowels there are. Count of vowels starts at 0. Maybe I'll just call the variable count just to make it easy on myself to remember. So count is going to start at 0. And then for typical accumulator pattern, we are going to run through whatever it is that we're trying to count or add up or process. So we're going to run through this string s. We're going to do 4 character in s. I'm going to use this word character for the loop variable because that's what each value of it is going to be. Regardless of what you call the loop variable, if you're looping through a string, if you're putting in and then a string, then the values for your loop variable are going to be characters in that string. So even if you call it like, you know, list or something, like it won't be a list, it'll be a character in a string. So you might as well call it what it is, call it character. Or letter if you like, but they might not all be letters. They might be like spaces and periods and stuff. Okay, so for each character in S, what I want to do with it is basically just check if it's a vowel, and then if it is, I want to add 1 to the count. So I want to check if character. So the easiest way to check if character is a vowel is to check if it's in a string that has all the vowels. So A, E, I, O, U, A, E, I, O, U. This is the easiest way. So if character is in that vowel string, then I'm going to update my count to be 1 more than whatever it was before. And otherwise, I don't need to do anything. So I'm just going to leave off the else. If the character was not a vowel, then I don't want to update the count at all. So that's all I really need to do. Make sure you indent to the right spot when you're returning your count. It needs to be lined up with this 4 here because the return needs to happen after the loop is done running. Okay, so it needs to be aligned to the same place as where the loop started at here. All right, and then we could actually just like test this, even though you won't be able to do it during the test, but we can do it for practice purposes. Let's try like count vowels. Hello should have 2. Yeah, I don't know, my name has 4. Okay. All right, so I'm going to update this with comments before I go to the next one. Okay, so let's look at the next problem. Write a function called average that takes one parameter, a list of numbers called L, and returns the average value of the numbers in the list. Do not use the built-in sum function to add up the numbers. Use the accumulator pattern instead. You can use the built-in len function to get the number of entries in the list. Okay, so we're writing another function that takes an average. You guys have done this a few times by now. So hopefully this feels pretty straightforward to you. So we're going to start the sum at 0. So we need to sum up all the numbers in order to get the average. So we'll start it at 0. Okay, then we're going to loop through the numbers in the list. Okay, so for num in L. L is the name of the list. Okay, and then we're going to update the total to be whatever it was before, plus the current number. Okay, so total is going to be assigned to be whatever it was before, total, plus the current number in the list that we're looking at. And then at the end, we're going to return not quite the total, but the total divided by the length of the list. Okay, we have to divide by the length of the list to get it to be the average instead of just the total. All right, so now I'm just going to test this and make sure that it works before I move along. But of course, on the test, you will not be able to do that. Okay, so I just did one little test, but it seems fine. Okay, so going to the next one. Number 4, write a program that asks the user to input their GPA and then tells the user the corresponding letter grade. So if the user enters a number that is not between 0 and 4, the program should print an error message. Okay, so we'll have to check for that first and then do that. Otherwise, the program should print the grade according to these rules. 3.5 and above is an A, 2.5 and above is a B, 1.5 and above is a C, 0.5 and above is a D, and below 0.5 is an F. So it's kind of unusual to convert a GPA to a letter grade, but this is indeed how you would do it if you had to. Okay, so we're going to ask the user for their input. Ask the user put in their GPA. Okay, so I need to pick a variable name for that. I guess I'll just call it GPA. All right, and then I'm going to also be converting this to a float, so I'll just start off with the float part. And then I'm going to be asking them, enter your GPA. So we'll say numbers and decimal point only, something like that. Just to kind of, hopefully they don't put any other extra weird text in there or something. Okay, and then next thing I want to do is I think I want to check their number, check if their number is not between 0 and 4.0, and if it's not, then I want to tell them they did something wrong, give them an error message. I guess by printing an error message, I didn't mean a Python error message. I just meant the programmer would use the print command to tell them that they did it wrong. Okay, so there's a couple ways you could do this. You could do if GPA less than 0 or GPA greater than 4. Or you could do something if not, and then have this kind of thing. GPA between or equal to 0 and 4. Either way is fine. Probably the first way I did it is easiest. So if the GPA is not, if the GPA is less than 0 or it's greater than 4, those are the bad GPAs. So we would tell the user, error, please try again, enter a GPA between 0 and 4. Okay. And then otherwise, if they didn't do that, then, so I'm going to use elif because this is an otherwise situation. So otherwise, if they didn't mess up, now I want to check what their GPA actually is. Is it an A, B, C, D, or F? So elif, the next condition I want to check is it 3.5 or above? So I'm going to check elif GPA greater than or equal to 3.5. Then I'm going to print that they have an A. I'll just make it easy on myself and just print like just literally the letter A. Otherwise, if they didn't make an error and they didn't get an A, then I want to check if their GPA is greater than or equal to 2.5. So in that case, they have a B. Otherwise, if they don't have an error or an A or B, then I want to check if their GPA is greater than or equal to 1.5. So that'll be a C. Otherwise, if it's not an A, B, C, or error, I want to check if it's greater than or equal to 0.5. This will be very sad if this is the case, but it does happen sometimes, like when someone flunks out the first semester. Okay, then they have a D, and otherwise, just anything else would be an F. Oops, I gotta put the quotes. Okay, and that is it. So you're gonna want to double check on the test that you put colons like every place here. Make sure you put the greater than sign before the equal sign, just like how you say it. The word greater than comes before or equal. Okay, make sure you put float outside of the input. And yeah, other than that, I think hopefully it's pretty straightforward. I'll just add some comments before I move on. Okay, so next question. Write a program that asks the user to input a positive integer and then use the accumulator pattern to calculate the sum of all the integers 1, 2, 3, etc. up to and including the user's number, then print the sum. So for example, if the user enters 5, the program would print 15. That's 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 is 15. Okay, so this one is not too bad. So first we're going to ask, I'm just going to call it answer in all of these, I think. So answer, we want them to do an integer, so I'll do int. And then input, enter a positive integer. Okay, so ask user for pos int. Okay, and then we need to use the accumulator pattern. So we're gonna need a total. So we'll start the total at 0. Okay, and then we're gonna need to loop through all the numbers that we want to add up. So loop through nums we want to add up. All right, so we're gonna do 4, I guess I'll just call it num in, and now we're gonna need to use a range. Okay, so we wanna start at 0. I guess it would be, we wanna start at 1. It would be okay to start at 0 since that won't affect the answer because it doesn't add anything, but let's just keep it easier on ourselves mentally and start at 1 like we were told to. So we'll start at 1, and we wanna stop at, including the user's number. That means that the second argument here needs to actually be 1 more than their number. Okay, because remember the range always stops right before that second number that you put here after the comma. Okay. All right, and then we're just gonna update total to be old total plus current number. Okay, that's how accumulator pattern works. So total equals total plus num. And then we're just gonna print that out. Okay, make sure you put your print after the loop, so it's going to be lined up with the word for. So we're going to print total. Okay, so after the loop, print the total. And that's pretty much it. We could run this and see if it works, but you won't be able to during the test, but maybe let's just see if I put 5. Yep, I got 15. Okay, next question. So number 6, write a function called pay that takes 2 parameters, rate and hours. The parameter rate represents the hourly pay of a worker, and hours represents how many hours they worked. If the worker works more than 40 hours, the rate of pay for the hours above 40 should be doubled. So basically they get paid double the rate if they work overtime. So for example, if the worker's pay rate is 10 and they worked 45 hours, they would make $10 per hour on the first 40 hours, and they would make $20 per hour for the last 5 hours. Okay, so their pay would be 10 times 40 plus 20 times 5. And that would be 500. The function should calculate the amount of pay and return it. So for example, pay 10 comma 45, that would return the calculation we just did, which is 500. Okay, so first of all, we need to make sure you distinguish between the problems where you're asking the user for input and the ones where you're defining a function. This is defining a function. So we're not going to ask the user anything, and we're also not going to print anything. We're just going to return things. So we define the function. It's supposed to be called pay, and it has 2 parameters, rate, hours. Okay, don't forget your colon here. All right, so I guess what we need to do to calculate their pay is we have to figure out if they worked more than 40 hours or not. and do something differently. So I'm going to say if their hours, so I'll do the easy one first. Like if their hours was less than or equal to 40, then I'll just return their hours times their rate, right? That's all it is, just hours times rate. But now if their hours were above 40, I have to be a little bit careful here. So what am I doing? So I'm going to put their regular rate on the first 40 hours, right? So maybe I'll do this with some variables. So like first part, I don't know, this is a dumb variable name, but okay, like first part will be the first 40 hours. So just 40 times the rate. And then the overtime part, maybe I could call it that. So it'll be, I need to figure out, okay, so it'll be 2 times their rate, right? And then I've got to figure out how many hours they worked above 40. So for that part, you do need to use subtraction. You're going to do hours minus 40, like that. Okay, so it'll be 2 times the rate, and then that'll be for all their hours above 40, so minus 40. All right, and then we're going to return and just add those two together. Overtime part. Okay, these are dumb variable names. You don't have to do it like this. I mean, you could just type out the whole formula like in one swoop without defining variables, but sometimes defining variables makes it easier for students to understand. So I'll do it like this. All right, and that's it. So in either case, we return an answer. And I'll just go back and put some comments in before we move on. Okay, something like that. All right, number 7, write a function called max of 3 that takes 3 parameters a, b, and c, which are numbers, and returns the greatest of the 3 numbers. So for example, max 234 would return 4, max -2, 0, 1, or -1 would return 0, and max 111 would return 1. Do not use the built-in max function. Okay, so let's see what we can do here. So we're writing a function. So we're going to start off with def max of 3. Arguments are called a, b, and c. Okay. Well, what are we going to do? I guess we can just check, like, is A the max? Is B the max? Is C the max? Right? So how would we check if A is the max? So we can check if A is... I want to use actually greater than or equal because I don't want to end up in a situation where, like, with 111, where I end up not returning something. So instead of using strict greater thans, I'm going to use greater than equals. So if A is greater than or equal to B and A is greater than or equal to C, then A is the max. And this also includes the possibility that actually A, B, and C could be the same 3 numbers, like 111 would also trigger this conditional, this Boolean expression would also be true if the numbers are all the same, or even if just 2 of them, like A and B, are the same. Okay, so if A is greater than or equal to B and greater than or equal to C, I'm going to return A. Otherwise, what am I going to do? So I guess in that case, either B or C is the max. I already know it's not A in this case because I'm doing an elif. That means I already know this is false. So if it's not A, then I just need to compare B and see which of them is bigger. So in this case, I'm just going to do elif B is greater than or equal to C, then it must be B. That's the max. And otherwise, if it wasn't A and it wasn't B, it must be C. So I'm just going to do else return C. I think this is probably the easiest way to do it. There's probably some other ways that you could program it, but this was probably the most efficient way that I can think of. All right, I'll go and add some comments and then resume. All right, so number 8, write a program that asks the user to input a positive integer and then use a for loop to check each integer from 2 to 1 less than the user's number to see if each of those numbers is a divisor of the user's number. For each number that is a divisor of the user's number, print a message to the user telling them that number is a divisor of their number. So for example, if the user enters 12, this is what they would see. 2 is a divisor of 12, 3 is a divisor of 12, 4 is a divisor of 12, 6 is a divisor of 12. So divisors are like factors. They're numbers that if I do 12 divided by 2 or 12 divided by 3, I get a 0 remainder. Okay? So this is one where I'm going to do user input, not a function. So basically these will all be either one way or the other. Either you do user input or you do a function, not both. Okay, so I'm going to do user input. So I'm going to ask user for a pos int. And I'm just going to be really creative here and just call it answer again. And I did say an integer, so we'll convert this to an int. Input enter a positive integer. Okay. And then what I want to do is, just like it says in the directions, use a for loop to check each integer from 2 to 1 less than their number. So I'm going to do loop through ints from 2 to 1 less than answer. Maybe I should call that user's input. Okay, so I'm going to do for, maybe I'll call this num in, and then I'm going to use a range to do this. So I want to start at 2, and then I'm going to stop at 1 less than the user's input. So I'm going to put answer for the second number here, because that'll make it stop at 1 before that number. Okay. All right. And then what I want to do is I want to check if that number is a divisor of the user's number. So how you do that is you check what's the remainder after division. Check whether each num is a divisor of user's number. Okay, so I'm going to check if I divide the user's number by the current num in the range. I want to see if I get a 0 remainder, because if I get a 0 remainder, that means that num is a divisor of answer. Okay, so if it is, then print the message to the user. Okay, so I would print the current number that I'm looking at, which will be num, and then is a divisor of, and then the user's number, which would be answer. Okay, and I think this is it. There's nothing else that I need to do. You won't be able to check, but we can check right now. So let's just do that. 12. Yep. Okay, cool. So the next two questions are actually related to this one. So for number 9, we write a function called num divisors that takes one parameter, a positive integer n, and it returns the number of divisors that are greater than or equal to 2 and less than n. So basically we have to do the same thing as the last question, except instead of printing these messages, we're gonna use accumulator pattern, and we're gonna add 1 to the count each time instead of printing the message. So for each, I think this should say for example. For num divisors of 12, you would check all the numbers from 2 to 11 to see if they're divisors of 12, and then you would return 4 because 4 of them, 2, 3, 4, and 6, are divisors. So you will need the accumulator pattern to count the divisors. Okay, so we're going to do def num divisors, one parameter called n. Okay, so we're going to use accumulator pattern, so we're going to start the count at 0, and I'll just call it count to make it easy on myself. And then I'm going to loop through the numbers the same way I did before, like this, except instead of answer here, it's going to be the number n, right? Because that's the argument that is passed to the function. Okay, so I loop through nums from 2 to 1 less than parameter n. Okay, and then every time I see one that is a divisor of n, I want to add 1 to the count. So I'm basically doing the same check that I did here, except instead of checking answer, I'm checking n. Okay, so check whether num is a divisor of n. Okay, divisor means the remainder is 0 when you do the division. Okay, and if it is, if so, add 1 to the count. Okay, so update the count to be count plus 1. All right, and that's pretty much it. Just need to return the answer now. So after the loop, return the count. So return count. All right, and then we can maybe just like run this one time to check if it's working, although obviously you will not be able to check on the test, sadly. Okay, so it looks like it's probably working. All right, last question is also related to this. So write a function called isPrime that takes one parameter, a positive integer n, and returns true if it has no divisors in the range from 2 to n minus 1. Otherwise, it should return false. So for example, 12 has 4 divisors in the range from 2 to 11, so isPrime 12 should return false. On the other hand, 11 has no divisors from 2 to 10, so isPrime 11 should return true. So basically, you can reuse most of the code that you did here, But instead of returning the count, basically you just want to check, is the count 0 or not? Right, so I'm actually going to like copy most of this except for the return statement. And I'm going to change this to is prime. So we're going to, I'll put a little note here saying start the count of divisors. So basically like we need to check how many divisors there are. Start the count of divisors at 0. Okay, and we add up just like we did before. And then when we get to the end, we need to check if there were 0 divisors or not. So if there were 0 divisors, then we got a prime number. So in that case, let's see, so if count equals 0, then it's prime, right? So then n is prime. So return true. And then otherwise we can return false. Actually, there's like a more efficient way to do this whole part at the end here. You could just, instead of doing this, you could just return this. So this will already be evaluated to true or false. So if the count is 0, it'll return true. If the count is not 0, it'll return false. So that's like kind of an easier way to do it. Maybe not easier mentally, but it's more efficient in terms of coding. So return whether or not the count is equal to 0. So like return the answer to the question of, I don't know how to explain that. Like Python is going to ask itself this question, is the count 0? And it's going to answer itself with either true or false. And then that true or false is what's going to get returned. Okay, so that is it for the practice part 2 on writing code. Hope you enjoyed it.